Tao-san.
Oh, hi, Rio. Are you trying to find out what happened to Shenmue 3? Well, you've come to the right place.
What happened?
Oh, don't you know, Rio? You're stuck in the middle of a new episode right now.
I see.
Yes, Rio, your quest has finally led you here. Now, while I already covered the series a little bit in my Dreamcast video, it's now time to fully turn our attention towards what might actually be the most divisive, tumultuous time in the fan favorite action RPG's history, which is saying a lot considering, well, it's Shenmue. And to do this, I'm going to need the help of someone who loves both video games and specifically Sega.
This is cool.
Someone who's excellent at making video essays, and someone who is a dear friend of mine. So without further ado, my favorite Irishman, Super Eyepatch Wolf.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here.
You, ready to do this, though? You've danced this dance with this particular franchise before.
I have, but I think I've recovered from it, so... let's do this. What happened to Shenmue 3?
Rio, what happened?
Chickens.
So, in 1995, Yu Suzuki, legendary creator of all this, was asked to make a virtual fighter RPG, yada yada yada, 6 years, 2 games, more than $50 million in costs, and the early death of a console later, Suzuki's standing within Sega fell somewhat, a stark contrast to the 90s, where he was, let's not mince words here, a goddamn superstar. After Shenmue 2 shipped, the series understandably struggled to return in any tangible form, which was due, at least in part, to Sega becoming a software-only publisher and cash being in short supply. In fact, Yu Suzuki himself struggled alongside with it because, aside from some producing roles on things like Virtua Cop 3, yes, there was a Virtua Cop 3 that never got ported anywhere, as well as a few more racing titles, his directing work slowed down. Way down. 2001 would be the last year he would helm a project for almost a decade, but going out with Shenmue 2 and Virtua Fighter 4 especially is certainly a distinction. Now, what was unfortunately happening during those long 9 years was a string of cancellations. He was making stuff, it just never seemed to work out in the end. Sci-Fi, an arcade fighting game controlled by a giant touchscreen, tested poorly and saw limited distribution in Japan. Shenmue Online, which did reach a significant level of completion, was then also cancelled due to Sega withdrawing their online division from China, effectively killing the project. Finally, there was Pure Breed, which was an experimental video game that involved something. An animal, maybe? It was axed very early on in its life cycle. A clear problem here was that Suzuki's legacy and experience mostly revolved around the arcade scene, and the arcade scene wasn't exactly booming in the mid-2000s. Sega was investing more and more into the console space and less into the smoky, labyrinthine halls of game centers. So that, coupled with the commercial failure of Shenmue, meant that Sega was very hesitant to give Suzuki carte blanche to create anything risky, or just anything at all. So in 2009, he decided to just open up his own studio, EaseNet, to develop a Mafia Wars-inspired Japanese Yahoo Messenger mobile game called Shenmue City, which lasted for about a year. I can't imagine why. Once those servers shut down, Suzuki officially left Sega in 2011 so he could concentrate on EaseNet full-time. It's here when Sega themselves contracted them to develop something called Virtua Fighter Cool Champ, and something called Virtua Fighter Fever Combo. All of these were Japan-only mobile games, and neither of them were actual Virtua Fighter games. These were some of the darkest days for Shenmue fans, where all they could hope for is but a fleeting moment of joy as they controlled Ryo riding a forklift in a kart racer. It really did seem like Suzuki's epic tale of revenge, honor, and friendship would go untold. Meanwhile, in a totally different part of the world, Ryan Payton, a former producer at Konami who had worked on MGS4 Guns of the Patriots, had found success in 2011 when he established his own company, Camouflage, and kickstarted the clandestine stealth game Republique, one of the most ambitious video game kickstarters of its day. Therefore, seeing the value of Kickstarter and being a lifelong fan of Shenmue, Ryan got into contact with Suzuki through some connections he had made within Sony, specifically the man with the knack for hardware architecture, Mark Cerny. The pitch was to utilize Kickstarter as a way to rally the Shenmue fanbase in order to finally make the dream happen, seeing Ryo complete his quest. In an interview with Game Informer, Payton detailed what his thought process behind all this was. I was really bothered by the fact that Yu Suzuki had this incredible saga of games he wanted to tell, and how that was seemingly ending with Shenmue 2. I always felt in the back of my mind that if I ever had the opportunity to help Yu Suzuki, I would, because in a lot of ways, he was a god of the Japanese games industry. Now, as it just so happened, before Kickstarter was ever in the conversation, Suzuki was in fact trying to figure out his own way in bringing closure to the story. His thought around the time was to scale everything back, the scope and the mechanics, and to just focus on that story. Think of a Telltale-style adventure game. Now here's where the story starts to get a bit complicated. The original Shenmue's development lasted for 6 years and cost Sega close to $50 million, more if you include its sequel. That was justified though because in 1999, Suzuki's magnum opus was seen as massively ambitious and unlike anything being attempted at the time. But what does the budget and scope of a Shenmue 3 look like some 18 years later, given the increasing ease of making 3D games over time via more robust tools and advancements? It would in theory cost both less time and money, but that's the thing. Shenmue got a lot of slack and praise due to all the new things it had pioneered. So the budget and the gravitas of bringing back such a series was obviously a concern, and since Sony was the go-between during Payton and Suzuki's early talks, it wasn't long before they became an official/unofficial partner as well. Now, make no mistake, no matter how much a crowdfunding campaign initially asked for, and no matter how much that crowdfunding campaign would ultimately raise, it was still not going to be nearly enough to fund an open-world action RPG. Such is the nature of game development. They needed other partners to make this thing a reality. So at E3 2015, Sony proudly declared that they were putting the full weight of their E3 stage show behind Yu Suzuki so he could officially announce the Shenmue 3 Kickstarter, which was kind of extremely weird. I'm not sure if there's been anything quite like that before or since for a massive conglomerate that rakes in billions of dollars in yearly revenue to sort of present, not launch, but present a crowdfunding initiative. The campaign itself asked for $2 million and made it pretty clear that this was a grassroots effort, that only the fans themselves could make this possible. It then proceeded to smash that goal and then some, which of course it did because it's Shenmue, probably the most well-loved franchise that had been left on a cliffhanger ending.
I know raw.
It's probably one of the most loved franchises left on a cliffhanger ending. When it was all said and done, the campaign more than doubled what it was asking, raising over $6 million and making the Guinness Book of World Records for the most successful video game Kickstarter of all time. Just as it was concluding, however, a few more details were revealed on how any of this was possible. Former Sony head of third-party relations, Gio Corsi, stated pretty plainly, Sony and PlayStation is definitely a partner in this game, and it's going to be run through third-party production. We're going to help EaseNet get the game done. We're going to be partners on it the whole way, and really excited to see this thing come out in a couple of years. We said the only way this is going to happen is if the fans speak up. We thought Kickstarter was the perfect place to do this. We set a goal of $2 million, and if the fans come in and back it, then absolutely we're going to make this a reality. Now, there's many ways for a publisher or company to support tiny projects, and while Sony listed off things like milestone reviews, submission help, and localization services, it's very much assumed that direct financial support was also one of them. And it's here where things get messy. EaseNet were never equipped to publish a game themselves. I mean, they hadn't even shipped a single product outside of a handful of Japanese mobile games. And Sega, well, they had licensed the Shenmue IP directly to Yu Suzuki, so they weren't much of a factor at all. It's really similar to Streets of Rage 4, where Sega's logo doesn't even appear. Therefore, it's pretty crystal that Sony was providing an undisclosed chunk of the game's true budget, but not the full amount, and they didn't want to directly publish it either, which is, again, just really weird. We'll be leaving the Kickstarter here though, but we'll be returning to it, don't you worry, because there's still plenty to talk about. For now, though, allow me to throw over to Johnny Wolf, who has an equal amount to discuss regarding the game's actual development and the choices that were made.
Thank you, Matthew. Almost all the choices they made were wrong. Now, if you've never experienced Shenmue, then I do need to give you a bit of context here. Since the game originally started as a Virtua Fighter RPG, the real-time battles used that game's fighting system as a base, which utilized block, punch, and kick. Through these three buttons, you had endless combinations of inputs that would result in a variety of different attacks and techniques. If you've gone a few rounds with any Virtua Fighter, you'll know how satisfying the fighting system can be. Simple to pick up, but hard to master. For no other reason than just wanting to change a core system that was established in the previous two games to be less intimidating for new players, Yu Suzuki or some other madman decided to scrap this system altogether, and in its place was something else, something that was not only unsatisfying but also didn't require an iota of effort to succeed in. We rebuilt Shenmue 3's combat from scratch. It's much more fun to play and much more approachable, even if you don't have much skill. We're using some AI elements, so even if you're just randomly pushing buttons, something meaningful will happen. Even if you're randomly pushing buttons, something meaningful will happen. This was such a tone-deaf change to make, because if this game was indeed for the fans, why strip out something that was so fundamental to the experience of the first two Shenmues? Dumbing down a combat system so anyone could play it is very 2009, but this was especially egregious since Suzuki and WiseNet chose not to modernize in many other ways. Interacting with objects, speaking to characters, just doing anything within Shenmue 3's world remained as clunky as ever. Suzuki then made it very clear that this was an intentional decision to ignore a lot of the advancements and conveniences game design had gone through since 2001. Now, it's true that there are many modern game tropes that are worth ignoring, but not when it comes to simple navigation or item management. To be honest, I don't play many other games. If you say you like Chinese food, you probably mean that you like to eat Chinese food. But what I like is the cooking of the food, not the eating. In most cases in the games industry, the guys who create the games also like playing games. But in my case, I really just love to create. So the way I develop is very different from ordinary game developers, which is... It's honest of him, I'll give him that. And I get what he's saying, but don't you think you should at least keep abreast of some basic things? I mean, in the real world, if you see some door and you want to open it, you open it. In the real world, you can touch and move everything. Because I don't play other games, I think it's very natural to interact with everything. The keyword I often use is reality. Shenmue isn't necessarily true to reality, but it is a reality you can trust as if almost real. That's what I consider entertainment.
I see.
Unfortunately, this meant that by most modern standards, much of Shenmue 3's design is archaically outdated, and it pains me to say this, laborious to actually play. What was once a fresh and intriguing experience 18 years ago is now an exercise in frustration, and a lot of that is due to another mechanic they decided to clamp around Ryo's neck. The new stamina bar drains throughout the day, and if you get too low, Ryo can no longer run and performs worse in battles. You know, the battles where something meaningful will always happen. In contrast to the relaxing nature of the earlier games, this meter constantly badgers Ryo to eat, which in turn drains his finances, which in turn artificially extends the game's playtime. While there's evidence to suggest that a stamina meter was intended for Shenmue 2, which would have been a big innovation back then, its inclusion here is not needed and is only a hindrance to the player. Ryan Patton in the same Eurogamer interview had this to say in regards to Suzuki's vision. "I was really worried how Yu Suzuki was going to be managing the budget of Shenmue 3, and maybe unfairly. He has really done an incredible job building a really big game with a relatively small budget. But again, Yu Suzuki is a visionary and he's very stubborn. He does not want to compromise." As for the story, the main thing that most, if not all, Shenmue fans were anticipating is to finally have the story advance, to finally see Ryo avenge the death of his father, and it just doesn't happen. Suzuki has always planned to make Shenmue a massive epic spanning multiple chapters like a long-running manga, but after 20-some hours spent walking, eating, fighting, talking, and eating again, the credits roll and Ryo's no nearer to completing his quest than when he started, making Shenmue 3 feel like a filler arc. At the end of Shenmue 2, Ryo watches Landy get away, and at the end of Shenmue 3, Ryo watches Landy get away again. 18 years of waiting, basically for nothing. Speaking of waiting, the game was delayed 3 times, from its original target release date of 2017 to almost 2 years later in November of 2019. Some or all of these delays were probably at Suzuki's behest, whom, as we've seen, likes things to be just so. However, being a full 2 years late was a hard pill to swallow for even the staunchest of Shenmue fans. This was also compounded by the fact that Suzuki himself went on record saying that the 6-year-long development of Shenmue 1 would not be repeated. In the previous Shenmue games, I had a bigger team, and because those team members kept bringing new ideas to the game, I had to continually change or correct things. There were many redos. We were doing things again and again and again. For Shenmue 3, I'm more involved directly in the details and all the elements of the game, so there is much less to redo. As a result, the effectiveness of development is much higher than the originals. Well, he was right about one thing for certain there. The team he had working on Shenmue in the late 90s dwarfed the one working on it now. Between 250 and 300 full-time Sega employees contributed to the original games, compared to the 75 EaseNet staffers and roughly 100 others from smaller support studios who supplied assets. There's no doubt that being understaffed had to have been a factor in the game's slow progress, but it wasn't the only one. Unreal 4 was what Yu Suzuki chose to power Shenmue, and while it's certainly a versatile engine, it was still fairly new in 2015, so there was a good chance that many of the staff at EaseNet had zero experience working with it. All of this was the result of an overarching problem. Huge projects like this, full 3D open world adventure RPGs, just aren't suited for crowdfunding. To really pull them off and pull them off well, you need hundreds of staff and millions more in funding than what ardent fans could possibly donate. That's why the most successful Kickstarter games are usually smaller in nature, ones that know their limits and don't overpromise, either by scope, features, graphical fidelity, or the amount of machines they appear on. While Ryan Payton's Republique was a good fit to the platform, something like Shenmue, the way Suzuki envisioned it at least, just was not. Oh.
You okay, man?
I'm fine.
Good, because we're not done yet. In the summer of 2017, it was announced that Shenmue now had a publisher, which was none other than Deep Silver, who were trying to calm the tumult from all the displeased backers of Mighty No. 9 just a year before. For many, their involvement with Shenmue raised a lot of red flags, a lot of quickly, but since Sony wasn't publishing the game, it left the door wide open for someone who would. Alright, so let's just get to it. Despite having Steam logos on the original marketing materials, and despite the opening of an official Steam page for the game that housed regular updates, Deep Silver announced in 2019 that they had made a deal with Epic to secure Shenmue 3 as an EGS exclusive. Now, this is very much a double-edged sword. Epic gives a fairer split in revenue when compared to Valve. At the same time, you can't make these types of decisions 2 years after the fact and expect people to be happy that they can no longer get the game they donated their money towards for their preferred choice of exe file. things then only got worse when Deep Silver stated that they wouldn't be able to offer refunds and that if you were unhappy, you could just swap out your non-existent Steam code for a PS4 or EGS one. Well, that was not met with any amount of enthusiasm. The vocal minority made their displeasure very known. After a solid month of that displeasure being made very well known, Epic stepped in and said that they would be covering all the costs from requested refunds so as not to drain funding from EaseNet's development budget. That didn't, however, change the actual deal. Shenmue 3 would remain an EGS exclusive for 1 year, which of course has since passed, but it was a black eye for pretty much everyone involved. Less egregious, but still pretty egregious, is that boxed retail versions of Shenmue 3 that were handled by Deep Silver contained exclusive pre-order bonuses, specifically the Blazing Kick Technique Scroll, a unique training outfit, and a Peking Power Starter Pack, whatever that is. These items would not be available to any backers of the Kickstarter who had pledged at any tier level. At least this was never specifically promised to them though, because these items became pre-order retail incentives 2 years after the campaign ended. It was another poor move though on Deep Silver's part. They simply wanted to entice non-backers to buy the retail package, and if backers really wanted it, then they would just need to buy it as a digital add-on. Come November of 2019, both critics and fans were heavily divided on the end product, as it played exactly like the old games, awkward voice acting and all.
Chobu-chan. What is this thing?
It really did feel like something that skipped 0 beats in its 18 years of hibernation, and some people truly, honestly applauded that. There is something to be said about a creative mind so laser focused on what it wants to make that it shuns almost all influences from the outside world. Yeah, that's right, I'm gonna make the game I wanna make. Damn the trends and gimmicks. If I want you to painstakingly put this fucking can of soda in your inventory and then have invasive tiny cutscenes interrupt you when you're just trying to walk through a door, then that's what's gonna happen. But there then should always be a balance to designing things this way, to make your intent shine through without actively inconveniencing the player, and given the very mixed response to Shenmue 3, ultimately means Suzuki didn't quite nail that. And honestly, in the end, it was always going to be impossible to please everyone after so many years of waiting and heartbreak. Shenmue 3 was going to disappoint some fans, like him, and there might not be a way to regain that trust again. As for commercial success, while it was a record-breaking Kickstarter, in terms of a standalone product, Shenmue 3 was pretty much a failure at retail, selling only 17,000 copies in Japan in its opening week, and not even charting in North America, although these numbers don't take digital sales into account. The CEO of Deep Silver's parent company charitably described the game's performance as fine, and a niche product, so take that for what you will. For his part, Suzuki has expressed a desire to make a Shenmue 4, but as of now, there's been nothing concrete announced. Kickstarter can be a wonderful tool for game creators to realize their dreams, but due to a multitude of reasons, it just wasn't the right avenue for Shenmue to have taken. And as of 2021, we're right back where we started, with Ryo Hazuki being no closer to finally achieving his destiny. Mr. Eyepatch, sir, you made an incredible video on Shenmue 3 yourself that basically inspired this episode. Where can people find that?
Well, Mr. McMuscleface, that would be in the description below. Check it out if you want to see more of my stuff, or you can come find me on Twitter at Eyepatchwolf.
Thank you, sir. And if you out there know of any other video games or media in general that know the divine struggle of eventually getting to release, let me know in the comments below, drive your forklift over to my Twitter, or take a walk down to the docks of the Flophouse VIP Patreon and become a big boss to nominate the subject of our next episode. See you next time, and thanks for watching.
Are you stupid? Yeah.